It's okay. Okay, premium account interface required. I think I need to do some editing. Okay, we're live. I'm gonna share the link to you now. So we are live on YouTube. So just share wherever you want to share. Yeah, we are already live now. So you can see we have 4 people. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining. If you're already joining, thanks for joining, and kindly share in your respective groups. Comrade Samba, your place of a day. Kindly share in all the WhatsApp groups on Facebook, in any group that you belong to on Facebook. And let us start. We'll be starting very soon. So kindly share. Okay. So we are actually streaming live on my personal YouTube, Facebook page, and also on this press secretary Facebook page, as well as on YouTube. So people can watch from all of these platforms. So thank you very much once again, Chairman, for taking out time to join me here in the studio. Actually, it is a beautiful studio to talk about this all important topic. I know that you are an expert in this field, and our people are going to have a wonderful conversation today with you and myself, and we will discuss in depth on what this has done to the continent as a whole, and then we will bring it down to what it has done in Cameroon and to Amazonia in particular. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining. Like I said, this is your girl, your lady, Cecilia Amabo. If you're tuning in, if you're a newcomer on this site, kindly subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comment section. And also, I'm inviting you to join the membership club of this channel. So if you want to be part of the team on this channel, kindly join the membership. And if you look on the YouTube channel, you will see just beside the subscribe button, you will see the join button. So you can just press the join button and you join to become part of this community. And to returning subscribers, what can I say? Thank you so much for being here, for always supporting the channel, liking, commenting, and sharing your thoughts, most especially in the comment section. It's been incredible. The interactions in the comment sections are incredible, and I truly appreciate you for that. And again, we'll be giving a shout out to all the members that have already signed in to be part of this team. So just know that if you're part of the community, whether you're a member or not, hey, we are giving you a shout out because your contribution is totally appreciated at all levels. So don't feel that if you're not a member, you're not part of the community. No, you are part of the community. And so, ladies and gentlemen, let's get back into today's topic. Today's topic, oh my God, I'm actually really overexcited about the whole thing because of what I know that this has done to Africa and how the information that we'll get from here. So guys, today, like I said, today is a very insightful topic. We are talking on the shadows of the past. Shadows of the past, the neo-colonialism in the 21st century. We are all conversant with this phrase. We are all conversant with this topic and the discourse that has been going on in the academia, in political field, in every aspect of our life. So today we dive into a critical topic that has shaped the trajectory of African nations for decades. Foreign aid and its influence or agenda of control and influence in Africa. For over 6 decades, billions and billions of dollars have flowed into the continent. But has it truly helped, or has it marked a sinister plot of neo-colonialism in the continent? Foreign aid, tagged as humanitarian assistance, has become a potent tool for Western power and China to manipulate Africa's economy and political landscape. This hasn't this isn't charity, it's about power. The power to dictate policy, shape land leadership, and control entire nations. The veil of benevolence has been lifted, revealing a complex web of interests that prioritize the donor's agenda over the recipient's need. Let's be clear, ladies and gentlemen, genuine aid should empower, it should uplift, it should pave the way for self-sufficiency. But in Africa, we've seen the opposite. Countries like Zambia, Mozambique, Kenya, Nigeria, Cameroon, Ghana, Somalia have received staggering amount of money, yet remain mired in poverty, in debt, and corruption. This circle of economic entrepreneur must end. The numbers are staggering. Over 1 billion in aid has been pumped into Africa since the 1960s. Yet the continent remains one of the poorest in the world. That is what they say. It remains one of the poorest in the world. Western powers have long viewed aid as a political weapon, attaching harsh conditions that cripple Africa's economy and compromise its leadership. The devastating legacy of structural adjustment programs like the SAP still lingers, leaving millions in poverty. The IMF and the World Bank have dictated economic policies, forcing African nations to what? To privatize industries, cut subsidies, and reduce government spendings. The result, what is the result? Many African economies were crippled, public services deteriorated, and millions were left in deeper poverty. Now, China has engaged, China has also entered the game. So now, China has emerged as a major player in the whole game. offering development loans with high interest rate, threatening to ensnare nations in a new cycle of dependency. Djibouti, a home of China's first overseas military base, is a stark example of what we are talking about and what we will be dwelling on today. The Belt and Road Initiative, touted as a pinnacle of Africa infrastructure moves, is in reality a strategy move to flow dominance. So, unsettling reality is that foreign aid often benefits donor more than the recipient, which is not what foreign aid stands for. If foreign aid benefit the donors themselves more than the recipient, then it is no longer aid. So this aid, they are perpetuating modern colonialism. African leadership is compromised, unable to act in the best interest of their people without facing foreign what repercussions. The sovereignty of African nation is under siege as external powers exert control through debt, economic pressure, and military presence in Africa. But is there hope? Yeah, there is hope. African nations are rising up against this new form of subjugation. Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso have rejected Western influence, seeking alliance outside traditional powers and embracing Pan-Africanism. More leaders are calling for reforms focused on self-reliance, local industry, and debt relief. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we discussed today, we must question its true purpose. Is it about empowering Africa or maintaining foreign control? Until Africa breaks free from external influence, it cannot achieve true independence. The future of the continent depends on it. It's time for Africa to reclaim its part dictated by foreign donors, but by Africans for Africans. So, ladies and gentlemen, like I said, today's topic is really juicy and it's going to be a heated debate here in the studio. We said we are discussing on the shadows of the past, neo-colonialism in the 21st century. What is neo-colonialism in the 21st century? And like I said, our guest in the studio is an expert in this area, and he also sits as the chairperson of the Economic Council of the Ambazonian Governing Council, one of the leading movements for the liberation of the people of Ambazonia. And so, Mr. I will withhold his name and I will just continue to address him as the chairperson of the Economic Council. So, Mr. Chairman, you are welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. When I got the call about neo-colonialism in the 21st century, it was such a pleasure to talk about such a subject that has been hindering around us since 1960, which was when a lot of African countries had their independence, so-called independence. So it's an honor for me to be here.
Thank you very much. But do you want to throw more light on where are you based and where did you study and in what field are you? I know you have a huge in-depth in this, but if you want to talk about any other thing that you're involved in without necessarily disclosing anything that is most important to you and you want to hold as classified, you are free to go ahead and do that. So just give a brief introduction of yourself to the audience.
Again, thank you for having me. I am Emmanuel. Once again, I serve as the chair of the National Economic Council of the Ambazonian Governing Council. I currently reside in the United States, where I have been in the last 30 years. I worked in the financial services industry. Mostly, I've been in the financial services industry. In addition to that, politics, I would say economics and geopolitics, to be specific, has been one of my interests over time. So I've tried to garner knowledge and keep abreast of everything, most things that are happening around that subject matter. But overall, my interest has been trying to address the issues that continue to be like a yoke around the necks of countries of the South, which is placed primarily by what we would describe as countries of the North, the empire, the neo-colonialists, and not just the neo-colonialists, but the colonialists originally. So once again, I'm glad to be here to talk about these issues.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I'm so happy for you to have taken out time from your busy schedule, because I know you're a very busy man, to sit here today to talk to our people. And this is what we should all be doing, the entire African continent. Those of us who are out here who have the opportunity to speak, we should be able to create our time and speak to our people, educate our people, and empower the continent. This is how we contribute. So thank you once again. And so, okay. So today, let us go straight into the conversation. First of all, when you hear of the shadows of the past, neo-colonialism in the 21st century, what comes into your mind? When this topic is mentioned, what first of all comes in your mind, and what is it in the first place?
Um, Thanks once again. I think that is a very pertinent question. When you hear shadows of the past, it seems to give the impression that colonialism or neo-colonialism is something that happened in a century ago or 2, 3 centuries ago as it comes to the issue or the aspect of slavery. But as we look around us, we see that it continues to linger and continues to be one of the driving factors that continue to govern our daily lives, especially people that reside in countries of the South. In this case, our case study being the subject matter being in Africa. Now, it is very important for us to, before we really delve into the subject, to understand, because a lot of this is driven somehow by what I would align to culture of the people of the West, especially the culture being that they were the individuals that will um, uh, believe so much in the aspects of capitalism to the extent that um, you will create wars and kill and to make money. They would send individuals for expeditions, which happened, if you recall, to the Americas, just to make sure that they find out where all of the gold deposits may have been located, and then come back and report. This way, um, expeditionary forces can be sent to extract those goals. Now, the people of those cultures always believed that the land was for them to borrow while they were in this lifespan, spend their life, and then leave. That they did not own the land. That the land was there to serve them while they existed in this lifetime. Meanwhile, the colonialists had the culture where you come in, you claim ownership of land, and then extract its resources and keep it to yourself, even if it means killing as many people as possible. So, with that history, they spread their tentacles across the world, and this became the birth of colonialism as they went into places of the world. If you look at Australia, which is today currently inhabited by mostly Europeans and the indigenous people, what happened to them, and you look at the Americas, um, where they came in, took the land and took the resources, and could hardly be able to get everything for themselves, and had to go some places else looking for slaves to come and do all the labor and extract the resources for their own benefit. So this becomes the bedrock or the birth of colonialism. Today, that has, you will think that you ask the question, what comes to mind about the shadow of the past? You will think that all of those things happened in the past, but it has basically transformed. It's when it became not appetizing as it used to be, then it basically changed forms from the use of slave labor for the extraction of resources to today other methods that we will go deep into to talk about in the course of this conversation. But that is what essentially comes to mind, that it hasn't changed and it's remained the same, and it has just changed forms.
Oh, thank you very much. And when we hear of humanitarian aid or foreign aid, we are looking at it from, it spans in different areas. It's diversified, and the more the aid is diversified, the more the influence is also diversified over African nations. So we've been seeing aids coming in for military assistance, military training, military support in the name of fighting against Boko Haram or Islamic insurgency in different parts of Africa. We've seen aid coming in from IMF in the forms of grants. We see the USAID providing fundings for countries. We see UNICEF coming in with its own initiatives. We see China coming in with loans, Oxfam, World Vision, and all of these countries that keep coming in with aid. And so even in the level of the financial institution, and it even goes as far as going into our very cultures, in the African continent. And when you look at what this philanthropy has done in Africa, we'll see that for more than 60 years, we've been receiving aid from developed countries or from these financial institutions that we've mentioned. But there's been no change in Africa. It continues to deepen the debt level of African countries to the World Bank and IMF. It continues to create a crisis within the country. The economy remains the same. There is a lot of corruption. There is a lot of poverty that they were saying they're coming in to alleviate poverty. So in a nutshell, has foreign aid been more like a curse or a blessing to the African continent, Mr. Chairman? And expatiate as much as you can.
Thank you very much for that very pertinent question. In a nutshell, or on its broad basis, aid has really not helped. Aid is always very important. Aid in terms of when let's take, for example, a country has a huge natural disaster. In the immediate aftermath of that event, it could really make a difference in the lives of the people that are impacted. But overall, we would break down these in a significant amount of details. It is essential that we all understand that there are many ways of control that the colonialists, the empire, the imperialists has used to influence the various aspects of society. As when we started this conversation, I made reference to the history and the culture of the imperialists and what they sought to accomplish. If you, it has never been about the interest. Sorry, let me put it this way: it has never been about any kind of social regards for the individuals that resides in, especially these countries of the South. It's always been about a game of interest, and in seeking that interest, then these imperialist powers or these colonial powers, I should use the word colonial since we're talking about neo-colonialism in this case.
Yeah.
It's always been about the interest of the colonialists. So as the world evolved from the 18th, 17th century or starting in the 16th century format of slavery and went towards another format where individuals were paid for their labor and in most cases almost like for nothing, pretty much in order to create this wealth for the imperialists that are there. This move to transform itself to a format where they would come over in your countries and then provide you with, if let's start with agriculture, for example.
Right.
If they wanted to kill your agricultural base, they basically would flood. If you were a major rice producer, they basically would flood your economy. The government of those countries will, in effect, provide stipends or some form of funding for the farmers of the country in order to bring down their prices. Let's take, for example, I was trying to avoid using specific countries, but if we say the United States would give funding to its farmers. Farmers would then produce this rice, and because they receive all of that fund additional funding, the rice would basically be for almost for free, and they would dump this rice in developing countries or the specific countries where the rice industry is targeted to be killed, to be
Right.
destroyed. And so it would be cheaper to buy this rice that comes in the form of aid than for it. The farmers that in those home countries that are growing their rice will no longer be able to grow that rice because essentially it will cost them more to grow the rice than just buying this cheap rice that came from in the form of aid from these countries. They can do that for like 4, 5, 5, 6 years until the industry disappears. And so by using all those tools to kill the economies of these countries, then they remain ahead. There have been many tools that have been used, not just the aspect of aid, but let's dwell a little bit around the aid issue. Um, it, it would not only come in the form of these subsidies, but it equally may come in the form of um, they send in these individuals, Peace Corps volunteers, and they come in as volunteers. These are individuals that the US may give, say, for example, $50 million as aid to Amazonia. And then that aid goes to these individuals that are like Peace Corps volunteers to provide form of value to the countries that are receiving them. These Peace Corps volunteers may come in as teachers, but most of the time they may show up as having to come in to provide help. These individuals tend to be those that the US government, the State Department will rely on them to provide intelligence to back. So because now they know very deeply, they are going out there right deep into the suburbs. They are interacting with the local population. So they know very deeply on the reports that they provide everything about this society. When they write a report, they can write a report that this whole area has 3 different schools. They have no zero hospitals. So when the U.S. presents its report, or at least they can speak about a country knowing very deeply about um, these the aspects of these countries just because of the intelligence that are provided by these Peace Corps volunteers that come in as aid. If you look at
Right.
the way they provided the aid, for example, to a country like Ukraine, this aid comes in the form of weapons that the money goes to manufacturers of weapons. The weapons then are shipped to Ukraine for Ukraine to use those weapons, and they call it aid. But at the
Oh,
end of the day, all of the money had stayed within the United States. So it was
okay.
generally not aid. It went to the manufacturers of the weapons, and then and so on and so forth, and was shipped to Ukraine. As we go on, there's a lot more to cover on this topic, but I want to stop, take a moment here, and allow you to come in.
Exactly. And that is, you've really given a broad base, detailed explanation on what, for our audience to really have an understanding of what we are going to be discussing today. And let us try to break it down in different aspects, political, economic, cultural, like you came in with, and the social aspect of it, because we've also seen how this foreign aid coming in. Let's look at it at the political point of view. We've seen how the World Bank, USA, China, and other IMF, because we know like the World Bank is for the American control dominates, and then the IMF is a European kind of like dominated part. And when they come in with this aid to different African countries, and we've seen this play in countries like Kenya, we've seen it play in countries like Ghana, we've seen it play in countries like Nigeria, even Cameroon itself, that when they send in this aid, now they begin to influence the policy of those countries because they have to dance to their own tune. So as an expert in this field and over the years as you have studied this aspect of foreign aid to the African continent, how can we just give me a second there now. So how can we argue that a foreign aid, which initially was supposed to be to help the countries grow, has rather led to a circle of dependency, African leaders now believe that they cannot do anything without truly depending on this foreign aid. And it has not only led to dependency on the Western powers, but it has also led to dependency in at the level of decision making at the governance of that country. How do we how has this been of any help to Africa, and how can we say foreign aid came into Africa as a form of help that has rather led to de-Africanization or devaluing or dependency in Africa? I don't know if you get what I was trying to put in there.
Right. I think that is a good way of looking at these things. If for our audience to be able to understand what is generally referred to as aid, the US has an educational system whereby when students graduate from high school, they then, most of the time, because college and universities tend to be very expensive, they then take what they call financial aid, which allows them to be able to go to college or to university. Now, that financial aid comes in two forms. The first one being actual loans that are provided, and those loans, remember the word here, financial aid. So basically, the reason they call it aid is because they are making it possible for you to take a loan without necessarily, as a high school graduate, without necessarily having any form of collateral or any form of other assets to be able to go to university. Nevertheless, that called, even though it's called financial aid, is still a loan in which you're taking that money, it goes towards the payment of school fees and any of the related expenses. And then upon graduation, or upon if you fail to graduate or just stepped away from your studies, then you begin paying that debt back after 6 months. Now, there's another form of student aid that comes in the form of actual aid, which is reserved for certain categories of individuals. But obviously strings attached. The reason I use that background is to for us to understand that when these things are called aid packages, they really are not. It's not grant. It's not specifically all grant money. It's actually a combination of very little grants and then loans that maybe otherwise that country, which is in financial distress, would not have been able to get. And a lot of times, the way that in the advent of the change in the financial system around 1970s to the Bretton Woods system, America gained control. At that point, most of the countries were in economic shambles. So America gained control of the IMF and the World Bank. So, like you said, comrade, these institutions became under their control. So, as part of the extension of the control of other countries, um, they then structure it in such a way that in the event of the extension of these financial packages, it is mostly used in running America's foreign policy than anything else. So if we take the case of Kenya, for example, where Kenya got into the position of having taken all this debt in order to support its growth. So they got into a place where this debt was becoming due. It started to constitute over 70% of the gross national product of the country.
Right.
So they had to look for ways to get the payments of not just interest but of principal, starting to principal reduction and not just interest. So they went on the way that they went about doing it is therefore to just about tax any and everything. So, but when these loans come into these countries, uh, the way that it tends to be structured. Sometimes you talked about earlier on, comrade, about structural adjustment program. They present it in such a language that all a listener, someone that is not aware of, when you hear about a structural adjustment program, it gives the impression that the structure, the economic structure, the political structure, the social structure of an entire country's system was not in a good place. So they recommended that in order for you to be able to afford the interest and principal payment of this loan, this is what you could do. And part of what you could do is to privatize all of the industries that major industries that are in that, especially strategic industries
Industries.
that are in that country.
Right.
If we move away from Kenya, for example, if you take another country that is very highly natural resource endowed, they
Yeah.
come in, they require you to privatize. So the US, because it had taken it was leading in a lot of this from industrialization historically. So it had developed its economic base. You have one country like in order to make this point, it's good to understand. Take Google for example. Google provides the search engine for most of the countries in the West,
Yeah.
and not just in the West. They are now in control of all of the search mechanism in almost most countries, except in this case countries of Asia like China and Russia, which have their own specific. But there are reasons for that.
Yeah.
So now they created these oil companies like well the major oil companies without specifically naming them. So when they come in with a structural adjustment program, part of it is these strategic industries. And then they bring in these single companies that are controlling most of that industry that are owned by them, the colonialists. They come in, they buy into that control of that industry. Say the oil company may be taken in this case by Shell or BP or Exxon Mobil and so on and so forth. And then if you take the case of La République du Cameroon, they brought in the company that would control their was that electricity or water? I think it was electricity
Mhm.
system, and it was privatized, bought by a foreign company. And what they essentially did, they never invested into trying to um, modernizing the supply line, electrical supply grid for the electricity, or improving upon them and expanding in the power supply to try to increase the wattage that they provided to the economy. Instead, they look for ways to significantly or slowly destroy that. And at the end of the day, most of the time now in La République du Cameroon, you barely get a few hours of electricity. And when they do that, part of the intention too is to curb the growth of industrialization. You cannot have major industries in your economic system if you can't provide the power that is needed in those industries. I just use power for example. There are many other aspects of the industry that they come in, the privatization picks up. Um, so that is one of the things that it does. I can continue going here, but I wanted to make sure that you didn't have before I keep it.
Exactly. No, it's fine. So again, we've seen a lot of African scholars come out to say Western aid has done nothing but disempower African nations and African leaders.
Right,
And what they have done is they've actually put Africa in a slumber or in a shamble because they come in with the guise of aid and they
right,
reduce our institution to reflect their own institutions. And when they come in, what they do is that they actually start from the level of the highest authorities. They have to be people that studied in their own institutions and understand the way their own institutions are run. So they use those people to put at the hem of all the aid that they are providing in that country. So it doesn't reflect the nations or the local institutions' values, but it reflects their own values. So the ministers, the managers of the aid, the finance minister, the economic minister, it all reflects their own value in the Western world and not even the values of the African nation that they claim they have come to help.
right,
So
right,
so they literally now use even our own people that have studied in their own institution to further enslave and further disempower our own people. So when we look at these aspects of aid in your own understanding and how this whole thing plays around, how do you coin or how do you to the understanding of somebody who doesn't have an understanding of how these things work. We've cited instances of how they use it to reflect their own this thing, and you've also cited examples of like the USA. But to further bring clarity to our people who think that foreign aid has done a lot of good in Africa, especially when they came in during that time of millennium villages, building wells, water tanks, and all of these things, and claiming that they are providing aid to our people. From your understanding, how best can you describe this aid, and how has it really impacted the economy or the lives of the people that they claim they are aiding in these African countries?
Comrade, good question. I think this is a classic way of, if you look at the way that during slavery things were structured, you had what is now known as the house slave, and then you had those people that were, these were individuals that usually walk inside the house or the homes of the slave owners, and they were treated slightly differently because they had earned pretty much the trust of the slave owners, so the owners could allow them to walk inside the homes. And as a result of that, they felt like they were probably slightly better off than those that worked outside of the cotton farms.
Yeah.
So, because slavery was no longer, I will use the word here, sexy, they moved away from that. And what they've done today is that they take these individuals. I mean, right around the period of independence, you had like the president of, I want to say, uh, the president of Togo, who had been, actually was Senegal, who had been trained in France, Senghor. He actually was previously a representative in the parliament in France, and then became the president of Senegal. So you have a situation where, in order for them to continue these aspects of slavery, they basically will have these individuals that they've probably trained and then nurtured, and then put them in those places to continue to. You will think that this is the president that was elected. Meanwhile, it is not someone that they elected. It was someone that was selected by them and put in that, and basically created a facade of a democratic election and put in that place to continue to implement whatever their agenda was. So we keep calling some of these things aid. We should equally be aware or be careful about what their media has been intoxicating. One of the means or the ways of control that the hegemon or the colonialists or neo-colonialists have used to control is to control thoughts, perception, thinking. And one of the ways that they've done that is the use of the media. They control like 80-90% of the media around the world. From, well, I don't want to go to the on the list, naming the list right now, but because they control that media, when they come up with a strategy, then they push it through their media, and their media looks for ways to tell the rest of us how good that policy is or how good that strategy is. So in this case, you have a situation where they're calling certain things aid. Now, look at where that aid money goes. They could have they create like a non-governmental organization that they call the Center for the Advancement of. I just made this up, so it's not related to that actual Center for the Advancement of Democracy or Center for this or that, which all it's always like really well sounding. So they provide this funding to these non-governmental organizations. What these non-governmental organizations do, if you look at the case of, I'm trying to stay within Africa here, but
Yeah.
if you look at the case of countries in the south, they come in and they could finance a radio station for the translation of the Bible to the local languages.
Yeah.
They could say they are the Center for the Advancement of Democracy. Meanwhile, perhaps the person that is the president of that country is somebody that they do not like. And as the person that they do not like, this Center for the Advancement of Democracy will sponsor um, protests, will sponsor events that are pushing towards opposing, or even may sponsor even the opposition party in that country that are opposing the president, putting to help put pressure on that president. in the name of advancement of democracy. Sometimes they would even sponsor radio stations, and that radio station or TV station, their use would be propaganda to try to advance the language, or to try to advance the whatever agenda that they have proposed to push in that country. So this is what, so some you're receiving this aid. The aid does not go to, if you recall not very long ago, at Uganda was under pressure. First, it wasn't just Uganda, but Uganda was under pressure to not pass a bill against homosexuality.
Exactly.
Homosexuality is not an African thing. Nobody, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just means that nobody, it's very minor to the extent that nobody really cares. But they come up with this whole idea that individuals are not being treated equally. But meanwhile, nobody has ever been abused of things like that. So the whole aid comes in towards pushing that agenda to advance equality. Meanwhile, it is the agenda that they are trying to push to distort our culture. They bring in that media too to tell us that. At one time, I took my family to an event, all very European oriented, and we were dressed in like aguada and traditional dresses. One individual came around and commented, "These are very good costumes," and I'm looking at myself. How do you call an entire aguada three-piece costume? So this is the way they see it. They use their media to push their jeans, Levi's, Levi, as they call it here sometimes,
Yeah.
push their business suit formal. So pushing their culture, pop culture, their music, and by doing that, they kill the local culture, they kill the African culture, because then they present themselves as this is better than anything else. Um, so that is one of the ways that they've used to do this. Now, you talked about putting in or individuals that do not represent the aspiration of the African people. They train all these individuals, they put them in positions of responsibilities, they provide to them the agenda that they want to push forward. One of the ways that they've sorted out to control has been, if you look at the regional organizations like ECOWAS, I think there is the East African Economic
Economic
Organization,
community.
the
Yeah.
community, thank you. The East African Community, even the African Union. A lot of these, the aid also comes in to support these regional organizations. But if you look at the agenda of these regional organizations, it's still the same agenda, which is not an agenda to build prosperity for the African countries or the countries of the South. It's still an agenda that is pushed by the hegemon, uh, the colonialists, to make sure that they continue to remain in control. Number one, they've used the other methods that we will talk about. That I wanted to take a break here and just give you a chance to, if you, unless you want me to keep on.
Okay, you will bring that in when you have the opportunity to. And I just want to, so that we'll redirect it in a way that audience will kind of like pick up with us and understand with us. So I'll just come in now more in the form of direct questions, so that in that way, while you're answering, it will also help them to participate. So I have a question here that somebody sent to me, that in countries like South Sudan and Democratic Republic of Congo, these are very South Sudan and Democratic Republic of Congo, foreign aid is essential for humanitarian relief. But how has the presence of international organizations like the United Nations and NGOs, often backed by Western donors, impacted the development of stable political institutions and local governance in these countries? Please talk to us.
That is a very poignant and good question.
Right.
First of all, let's look at what the intention of the colonialists is. Their
Yeah.
intention has never been to make these countries develop, because if they keep you poor and wretched, is very then what your first worry is food and shelter. Your first worry is not the resources that they are behind your back extracting. So
Yeah.
long as you're poor and wretched, then you cannot even have enough food to even stand to oppose their presence in your territory. So about the aid that they provide, they come in. If you, the intention was not even ever to bring in peace in the Congo Democratic and South Sudan. The intention is to make you subsist, to provide you with uh, what you continue to rely on. I was looking for a word to define that, but something that you can rely on an ongoing basis, and remain as poor and wretched as possible while they continue to extract your resources. I'll give an example here without using even South Sudan and the Congos. If you
Yeah.
look at the countries of the ASS, the Association of Sahelian State, or
Yeah.
AES, l'Association des États du Sahel, if you
Mm-hmm.
look at those countries, what they had done is the president of they brought in they create and train these terrorist organizations. They move them from countries to transport them physically from countries to countries. They had used these individuals in Libya to provide the ground forces that brought down the Libyan president Muammar Gaddafi, while they provided air support and basically destroyed the entire country. So they bring in these forces, calling them jihadis. They give them various names in different locations depending on how they what they want their agenda, or depending on the objective in that particular country. So they brought in these forces in the Sahelian state to attack the Malian capital. As these forces were approaching to basically to threaten the Malian capital, the president of Mali at the time, it writes to the French and asks for air support. They did not even ask for their presence, asked for air support. And instead of sending air support, the French government sent in 5,000 troops
Wow.
to be stationed there permanently, not even temporary. These troops then come to Mali, stationed permanently, and then they bring in troops from Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, and then, of course, the US. And then they go to the United Nations, they twist and use diplomacy, twist and to formalize the presence of those forces on a permanent basis. And then they keep using these jihadi forces, or these terrorist organizations that they've trained
Yeah.
to every now and then create the semblance of threat, so
Right.
that way to justify their presence. As they were present in this case with Niger, they were extracting Nigerian uranium for almost for
Right.
free, paying the Iranian government almost nothing, 18 cents per buck, while extracting those resources. I'm just using this as an example, but
Is
this is
yeah,
always
perfect.
this
And
is
that's a
always
great example.
this is always the case with many other types of resources or many other structures. So if we go back to the case of South Sudan, um, they one of the strategies that they equally use is very easy to control very small countries. If you look at a country like China, they cannot
Hmm.
really temper with China. So what they started to do with Russia too was to try to break Russia into smaller countries so it's easy to control. So coming back to South Sudan, what they did in South Sudan, the Sudanese president Omar Bashir at the time would not let the foreign oil companies to come into Sudan. A lot
Right.
of the Sudanese resources, especially the oil resources, are located in South Sudan in the Darfur region. So then they go in there and create conflict, and the conflict and the way that sometimes they've used this very strategy in many ways. They come in this section, they tell you that you look very differently, you speak a different language, or they use something that creates for slight differences between the peoples, and then use that as the wedge between the two peoples.
Right.
They did that too in Mali by trying to create a situation where they gave the picture of the Tuaregs being different from people of the southern part of Mali, calling them the Azawad region. So
Right.
they go into places like South Sudan, and then they create this wedge between the South Sudanese because it looks slightly darker, because they're
Yeah.
obviously closer to to the Sahara Desert than the
Yeah.
people of the north. And then at the end, the whole goal was to. I'm trying not to go into all the details of of the
Yeah.
of the case.
The
The
question. Yeah.
whole but the whole goal was to break South Sudan from the northern part of Sudan because they couldn't control the oil resources of Sudan as a whole. Then that then gave them access to the Sudanese South Sudanese oil, because now with a smaller country it was easier to control that. And what they've done too in Congo is to create a situation where they continuous conflict, and that conflict is not meant to ever end because you have the presence of they've used diplomacy in the United Nations and in some other countries to allow for the United Nations forces to come in, and these individuals always come in as peacekeepers. So their job is not to halt conflict. Their
Yeah.
job is not even to intervene in those conflicts. Their job
Yeah.
is just being there. A lot of times they're not even communicated as to what their true objective is,
Exactly.
but they're told to prevent themselves from getting shot. So don't do anything unless you feel like you're under a threat. So
Yeah.
then they stay there, while on the other hand they are feeding the conflict on one end, and the other they're providing arms from to one entity and providing
Yeah.
arms to the other entity as the two entities are fighting. Then you cannot build an economy based on wars that are going on. So, but they come. So because of that instability, they come in and do that. Sorry, I'm trying to really summarize this quickly.
No, exactly. No, I'm actually
Yeah,
enjoying it because you've picked on some very important points there. When, especially when it comes to the area of the peacekeeping forces that kept in these countries and the missions of these NGOs, because the NGOs, they say they go in there to provide humanitarian aid, and yet these peacekeeping missions have been in the same country, a huge number of them, in the same country for decades and decades, and yet there has never been any peace or stability in that country. And the question, the person here was raising the concern about the leadership and the stability of that country. We've also seen that, especially in the Congo, Sudan, and in Somalia, where we have a lot of these UN peacekeeping forces stationed in those countries in the name of bringing peace in that country. But all these countries have been in constant political turmoil in all of these decades that these peacekeeping forces are stationed in them. And the leadership, it has been from one political turmoil to another, one leader seizing power, another taking, and it all falls down to the population. They are the ones suffering, and yet they claim they are providing some kind of stability, peace, and then they create the conflicts, and then they come
right.
in with their humanitarian assistance and take control over everything. And
Yeah,
we've seen that
comrade.
a lot of. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, really quickly around what you're talking about. In order to
Yeah,
really fully understand that subject matter, look at what happened in Syria. Um, the Syrian, there were so many objectives, including the security of Israel and also just to get at Al-Assad, who is the president of Syria, to get at Al-Assad's oil resources that are in Syria. But you have other objectives like subjecting subjecting Syria to the under the control of, not direct control of, but to make sure that Israel always maintains the level of the leadership or military power over all the other Middle Eastern countries. But to the point, so I'm trying not to limit the whole situation in Syria, but to the point that you were just making, they
yeah,
come in and after destabilizing Syria, or they intended to remove Assad from Assad is the president of Syria, to remove Assad so that way they can put someone that another stooge that they can control and that would allow them access to Syrian oil.
yeah,
But then the Russians intervened. So, but they destroyed Syria so badly, including the historic area of Aleppo, so badly
yeah,
that the refugees moved through Turkey to Europe, and a lot of them went to Lebanon. Now you have refugee camps. When they say eight, so what they're doing now is to employ their citizens that are there, like teachers providing all these services. So you almost create a dependency society among refugee camps. So they've subjected the economy of a country to being a bunch of refugees that are very reliant on aid. That every morning you wake up, they come and give you tea. In the afternoon, they give you lunch. They provide education. But then, with all of that, what is the future of all these individuals? Now, a lot of them wanted to, through the help of Russia, a lot of these refugees wanted to actually go back because peace has been restored in like 80% of Syria.
yeah,
So they wanted to go back, but they would refuse for them to go back because they know that that would be the foundation towards continuing to build Syria and therefore
exactly.
destroy their long-term objective. So what we should be careful of in this whole conversation is to kind of look at all of these objectives of the hegemon, making sure that we see into what they're trying to accomplish and
Yeah.
finding ways to go against instead of creating a reliant community on this aid that you wake up in the morning, they give you food to eat, and then you sit around and not do anything. In
Right.
the afternoon, the same. Then they teach your kids in school. They provide medical services, so
Yeah.
you end up not being able to really express the proficiency of the human being that existed on this plane. So sorry to interrupt you. I thought I'd make that case.
No, that is
So,
absolutely okay, because you see, there's another question here that came into me. They say critics argue that foreign aid has hindered Africans' ability to become self-sufficient by pumping up weak governments and corrupt leaders to lead the African continent, which is to their own benefit and to the detriment of the citizens and the continent itself. So the person wants to, what role does foreign, sorry, the person is saying that what role does foreign aid play in entrenching poor governance in African countries like Angola, Zimbabwe, where political leaders often benefit at the expense of their citizens. So they have inculcated the aspect of becoming inability to become self-sufficient, but also putting up weak leaders to rule those countries. So how can you to better explain this to our people? The person has cited the example of like Angola and Zimbabwe.
yeah, I would say previously I would take a different approach here. Previously, Angola may have fallen, and even Zimbabwe. Those are not really the best example in this situation, just
Okay.
because he's for a very long time. We've had individuals like Mugabe, who was in Zimbabwe and could not have allowed something like that to happen in his country. That is why they gave him one of the highest number, thousands of sanctions against his country that led
Right.
to his currency going. So we know all of that story. So I might disagree with that example, but I understand the question. I respect that. The question is a
Right.
very good question, and it's very it ties a lot to a lot of other countries that are in Africa. So we know. I mean, even with Angola too, Angola has not really been in that situation. Angola has been. So what they did was they funded two factions in Angola. They ended up fighting wars long term, but Angola now has been doing in the last 10 years has actually been the entire city of Kuala, the capital. I forget the
Kuala
name now.
Lumpur. Yeah.
It has done very a lot of the buildings that are there, skyscrapers are all built by the Chinese. But
Right.
nevertheless, to get to you to address that question, we first of all have to understand what the hegemon or the empire has been trying to accomplish.
Exactly.
There are so many resources that are many of these countries in Africa are endowed by lots of resources. These resources cannot all be used all at once. Actually, let's take a step or two back and look at the empire's economy. The way that the economy has functioned, you have a few individuals, maybe like 400 families, that have over maybe $18 trillion in assets under control. They control more than 400 individuals, especially here in the United States, control
Right.
more than 50% of the resources of the entire country. So, in that kind of setup, these individuals I'm trying to in Russia they keep calling them oligarchs. These oligarchs
Mm-hmm.
in the United States, they have political control. They provide the funding for political campaigns, and when these politicians win, they go on to support the agenda. So
Yeah.
now, if we come back to, I bring that because it's essential to understand how why these things are the way they are.
Exactly.
So when these individuals, then these are people that are in the oil companies, they are in media, they are in all these really big corporations. So the resources of Africa, is, for example, is really huge. So they can't just use up all of that resources. So basically, they look for a way to preserve that resources long term, 20 years, 20, 30 years from now. But the African people cannot sit on their and fold their arms and not do anything. Right now, Africa has a population of about 1.3 billion, and the average age of a population is somewhere around 25 years old. So these individuals are looking for something to do. They can't really stay like that. So what the hegemon has done is to, in all these countries, is to put a stooge, position individuals there that they call the elites.
Yeah.
These elites directly report to them, and the job of these elites is to try to maintain control of those resources on behalf of long term, on behalf of these individuals that are setting the agenda within the hegemon. So that is generally the structure. So if you understand that it is not necessarily about poor governance. If you say poor governance, you can technically be blaming yourself for falling into the trap of being that stooge
Okay.
that has been picked up by the hegemon to protect their interest against the interest of the people. So a lot of these governors, a lot of these presidents of these countries, they can really do a good job. Sometimes it doesn't really require um, an innate managerial ability, aptitude to do the work of running the country. But because they have no control, they have no powers, the agenda is set by someone else, and they have to just implement
Follow.
that agenda. Then they tend now to look like really poor managers. It's just because they are subjecting themselves. Look at just how much improvement the countries of the Sahel, the AES, have done just in 2 years. They went from being unable to even fund the construction of a road because a lot of the money that was coming in was being used to pay the presence of foreign troops in their country, while these foreign troops were taking their resources at the same, not the troops by themselves, but the troops provided cover for their resources to be extracted at the same time. So by taking over the control of their country, taking over their resources, they have just been able, within this 1 or 2 years, been able to make significant progress in implementing or improving the welfare of their people without going into details and examples of what has improved. So I'm hoping
Exactly.
that I'm addressing this individual's question.
Concern.
So,
Right.
so
Okay.
it's also good to really quickly to learn, comrade, really quickly.
Yeah.
It's also good to answer the question. So where do we go from now, or what do we do about situations like that? So
Exactly.
it's essential to do that. But I'll give it go ahead before hopefully we can address what we
Exactly.
can do later on.
And talking about the Sahel states that you've literally just brought out, there's also some questions or concerns that came in on that. So, in your own view as an expert in this, looking, because I know you have a lot of a huge background and knowledge on this Sahel state and what has been done in the Sahel states over the decades. And we've seen that they've been plunged into this form of constant unrest, wars, coup d'etats, and all that. Would you say all these things have been happening because of the aid, military aid? Because when you look at all these nations that you've listed, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger,
Niger.
Guinea, all these countries, they all have military agreements with foreign powers like France that come in the form of aid, whatever aid, whatever aid means in this particular aspect. They come in that form, and then the political aspect is totally controlled by them. The military is totally controlled by them. Would this be the reason why these countries have been plunged into continuous terrorist attack, counter insurgencies, and all of these things? This is the concern. Is this that form of aid that Africa we are talking about in Africa that has brought these nations to their knees over these years?
Absolutely. This is one of the tools that the hegemon, the empire, has used to control the leaders. We keep blaming, well, not keep. I mean, there is a lot of blame to go around, including the leadership. But at the same time, it's also good to understand how much pressure they are on. If you look at what happened to, I'm just using these Sahel states just because they are the ones that have been able to so far attempted to break themselves
From
from
the
the yoke
foreign dominance. Yeah.
of dominance and control.
Yeah.
Um, if you look at what they did when I think it was Gambia, when Gambia attempted to do, Gambia had gone through an elections, and the elections were won, but the guy attempted to stay in power, but because he had started to oppose the military presence of the United States, basically the ECOWAS rally against him, and they threatened to send military forces, and they almost began a march um, to Gambia, and the president had to the elected president had to escape, and the country in favor of the individual that was favored by the West. So they used this massive pressure against the various leaders of these countries. To attend to the question that you just asked, whenever they come in, they present them, they give you mostly zero choice. The choice between the fact that you do what we're asking you to do, or we do this to you. So
Exactly.
the choices are always very limited. Sometimes you may say they give you a carrot or and a stick for you to see if you can pick the carrot or the stick, but most of the time the carrots are not even present. So it is more the stick and the stick.
Yeah.
So um, the offer that a lot of these presidents have received, it has been generally the fact that if you do not do this, then we're gonna make it bring hell to your country, and they gave the Sahel leaders the option. They even attempted some level of diplomacy, but the Sahel leaders, they even provided them the option to become elites within the context of global leadership. So we will bring you into our folds. You will attend the Paris Club, and or you'll be invited, like what they've done to Ruto, invited them for a carpet reception at the White House and all of
Yeah.
those, but they refused. One of the leaders in the Sahel state said, we like it here, even though they are now under sanctions that they cannot come to the United States. They said, we
Yeah.
don't care, we'll travel within the Sahel region. So, but
Right.
because they have refused all of those offers, then they started to send in significant amount of terrorism. There's been over like 32 attempted coup d'etat now in against the president Ibrahim Traore, because he is almost like the anchor of the Sahelian state.
Yeah.
Mali, even though Mali, sorry, not Mali, Niger, even though Niger has a lot resources, Niger, to be honest, still remains a generally a poor country. So it is now that they're starting to stand up a lot of the systems and structures, build out their military within these countries,
Right.
make it a little bit more steady. So the anchor was mostly Burkina Faso and then Mali before Niger. So
Perfect.
whenever you fail to follow the agenda of the hegemon, then they bring in all of these other things. That's part of what explains the chaos that has been happening in Congo. And when Chad could no longer stand that level of chaos, and the story of Chad, really quickly in summary, um, the Chadan army, the president at the time, had asked for French help. The French told it because he was not willing to agree to some of the terms that the French proposed. The
Right.
French basically brushed him up, tell him to basically talk to the Russians. They didn't know that he was actually going to talk to the
Going to
Russians,
talk to
and
the Russians.
he went and talked to the Russians, and the Russians welcomed him. The Russians basically sent in the Wagner forces, strengthened
Right.
his military, and then went against the terrorist forces that had been there destabilizing Chad. So slowly the
Right.
terrorists were being wiped out. Then the French started to look for ways to come back, but at that point it was too late. The president then felt empowered because of the presence of and the
The
cover
Wagner.
of Russia
Yeah.
in order to do what he's been able to reduce terrorism. It's not completed yet, but he's been able to reduce terrorism in his country, and that has provided the avenue or the atmosphere for some level of economic growth and development to happen within his country. So thank you.
Perfect. Wow, that is beautiful. Thank you so much. And I'm sure that those that are listening to us, they are taking note and they are learning a lot, because sometimes we just see these things happening. People will just ask, common a common sense question or common man's question: why are all these countries always at war? Why is it that this country today we hear of this terrorist attack, we hear of a military coup d'etats, we hear of military takeover, and they don't know what is happening behind the scene. And you throwing this light to people, it will open the minds of many. And Africa, like you said, these Sahel states have now risen to take control over their resources and over the governance of their own country. And I think that this is something that all African countries should begin to learn from, because if you do not take that decision or that bold step to break away from those level of influence and dominance from your country, then like Chad, they say go to Russia, not knowing that they will definitely go, and they did go, and it worked well for them. And so are we here advocating that all countries should now start leaning towards Russia? No, we have a question that will come up on that, but we are saying that if Africa truly wants to be independent, then we have to be able to stand up against some of these influences that these people bring into the continent. So somebody again is asking here, Mr. Chairman, that many African nations such as Somalia, Zambia, Mozambique, Burkina Faso, Mali, and all the Sahel nations that we've mentioned, Democratic Republic of Congo, have seen a national debt spiral due to dependency on this foreign aid or loan packages. So he wants to know, do you think that debt crisis faced by these African countries, well, it's a direct question which you've answered in many ways, or do you think that the debt crisis faced by many African countries today is direct consequence of neo-colonial aid strategies? How can African leaders truly break free from this economic trap? I think the last part, you've answered the first part and then the last part, but if you can still throw more light, however you choose to handle that, I will appreciate that.
Thank you, and I want to thank the guests too equally for that question. That's a very good question, equally. Um, I would say yes, the debt trap is actually really planned out by the hegemon, by the neo-colonialists. Eh, Um, if you look at the way that even their society is set up, when we started this conversation, when we started this discussion, we did mention the whole aspect of that used to previously exist between slave and master, and the control of the entire economic system by a few groups of individuals that are calling on the shots and determining the agenda for the entire for most of the populations of humanity. It's just now that a lot of other countries are breaking free,
Yeah,
especially countries in the Asian continent. Most of Africa and Southern America is still held under the yoke of the hegemon. Now, going to your question, if you look at the way that their society is even set up, if you take myself for example, and many of you watching who live in the United States, you earn an income, the income you pay an income tax, and then everything that you purchase from when you go to the store, you still pay the sales tax.
tax.
And when you make any kind of bill payment, you purchase a car, you purchase a home, you're being taxed double on that is you're being taxed on income that has already been taxed. So at the end of the day, the whole objective is to give you very little and reliant on just basically trying to catch up on the next job, so that way you can make the next payment. So when you live in a situation like that, you have very little time to focus on anything else, because at the
Exactly.
end of the day, every day you're just trying to meet the
Sorry.
obligations that come with
Yeah.
making those payments, because you're getting the minimum. Now, against that background, if you go to the level of the country, if you look at the way that the country has been set up, the countries are meant to be given, not just because they're given those levels of indebtedness, so they can now every time they can't really focus on the development of their own country. They can focus on reallocating resources towards building hospitals, building. So at the end of the day, they are only getting that money to pay for principals and interest. So that growth never happens. The country remains poor and wretched. And then, if when a country is poor, wretched, and doesn't have the resources, it continues to rely on the hegemon. And when you are relying on somebody, then basically that person always tells you what to do. Your resources, they come in, they say, If you need this loan, then you give us control of this. Then they control your economy, and they always take. So that is basically the basis of it. Now, a lot has been happening. I think that I would say that we should be all excited that we're living in this moment in time in the history of humanity. The reason being that after the Second World War, you had one pole, the United States emerged as the sole standing guy on the block. China was basically manufacturing pencils, HB pencils. That was it. Um, Japan had just equally emerged from war. You remember the Hiroshima event and the Nagasaki event. I'm not going to the details of that. So basically, Europe had been destroyed completely from the Second War. So the United States was the only guy standing on the block, and they controlled, they called the shots, they did everything. So gradually, towards the 70s, 80s, you come to a very huge, massive competition between the Russians, which were the primary country that defeated Hitler in this case. So they remain standing, especially from a scientific basis, advancements in science. So they had to continue to have a very strong military. They were the individuals that were sending people to space and the moon, and they equally, at some point, even all the way through to today, they were the ones that were providing transportation for NASA's astronauts to go to
Yeah.
space. So the United States had not been able to develop that transportation mechanism. So that's just to say how Russia gradually emerged as a
Yeah.
very strong pole. And then today you're having gradually the Chinese equally have set up a base in which they stayed quietly and they grew to where they are now. Their navy is, they have more ships in their navy arsenal than the US. Now they have a strong military of, I think they have a standing army of over 2 million individuals, and so on and so forth. Without getting, let's get to your question. So you have these different nodes or these different power centers
Yeah.
that have now come to the realization that for everyone to be able to make progress, there has to be a change. One of the ways that the hegemon has been able to control the rest of the world has been through the United Nations. They have spelled out this whole idea of rules-based order. So long as it is favoring them, they bring it out that you have to push for democracy, you have to push for human rights, and they use that as an excuse to attack Libya, to attack Iraq,
Yeah.
to kill all these other countries.
You're right.
So you're having a situation now that, I'm answering the second part of your question, which is basically what can we really do about it? How can we address this situation?
Right.
Um, the China has partnered as an anchor with Russia because basically they understand that they are the two really solid countries that can go against anyone else in this world, and not just through partnership. Right
Yeah.
now, the Russian army has become so strong to the extent that I actually personally, this is a personal opinion, think that they're even more powerful than the United States Army. The United States Army historically was very strong, but
Yeah.
Russia, the war has forced them to advance in their technology, to advance in so many aspects, military aspects, that not to Russia in this case. So they've partnered together. China and Russia have partnered to create this other structure, this other pole, in
Yeah.
which gradually they are now allowing other countries. The reason that the countries in the Sahel are able to stand against the hegemon in our conversation is partly because they now have, especially the Russian
Backing.
military
Yeah.
through previously Wagner, but now Wagner has become a part of the uh, Russian government military itself.
Yeah.
So that is providing a lot of this the military base,
Yeah.
the strength for which these countries in the Sahel militarily are standing on. Otherwise, the French would have just come in and maybe bombed them and bombed the whole place together. But they cannot
Right.
do that because they would have to kill Russian forces, and they kill Russian forces. Then, so that's one of the ways. The other way is that Chinese have created this international Asian International Bank, I think for short, in which countries that are now under sanction could have only had the option to go to the World Bank and the IMF, now have other options. They could go to this and borrow money for much favorable rates and with no conditions attached. Uh,
Right.
yeah, the IMF or the World Bank will come in with the structural adjustment programs that basically tells you, like we talked about earlier. But this international bank will basically look for capacity to pay. If you are funding the construction of a power system, let's say, for example, a dam, then they'll provide you the money for the dam, knowing that the electricity bills will then pay towards. So that is what is looked at, the capacity to pay. They don't care
Right.
about intervene. So this is another way, method in which this is working towards circumventing that structure.
Okay.
There are many others that we can talk about, but I would like to note that before we go to the next question, I would like to note that the hegemon is actually reacting to to that as well. And what they've done is they've tried to expand their military presence. They've gone to countries like maybe like Zambia and told them that we can provide you with security. Meanwhile, Zambia is not under any threat from anyone, but we can
Mm-hmm.
provide you with security by creating a NATO office here. So basically, by creating all these military bases that they've now put one in Ghana, Senegal. They're now very recently they're constructing a new military base in Ivory Coast. So the whole essence is to basically create a situation where they block the access to raw materials or access to economic flow of the Chinese into these countries of the south by choking China's shipping and distributions of goods that are coming from, because China's economy is mostly driven by manufacturing coming from China. So, but we can have many of these detailed conversation can go into
Exactly, exactly. Because you have so much to give out here. You have so
God.
much, and I can bet you those in the comment section or those who will be listening afterward will so much appreciate this conversation. And ladies and gentlemen, like if you're just joining us, we are discussing the shadows of the past, neo-colonialism in the 21st century. And if you've not yet hit that subscribe button, kindly hit that subscribe button and also the join button beside the subscribe button, and also like, share your thoughts in the comment section. Let us have it as an interactive session. And Mr. Chairman, I'm just wondering, you mentioned a lot about this military base here, military. Why is it that we African countries, of course, we know we are all independent in theory, but why is it that we have all these foreign military bases coming into Africa? Why is it that Africa as a continent has not been able to create its own military that can really stand and defend Africa and defend its own countries? We have to rely on foreign military aid, foreign military this, foreign military assistance. Is this not why we are having all of this influence or dominance over African nations and over our leadership?
That is a good question, and you're very right. That is the reason for. I mean, that's why we can't really make any progress. Um, After the Second World War, the colonialists or the hegemon realized that initially, if you look at Germany, they set up shop as a foreign military presence in Germany, and the whole goal at the time of the agreement was Germany had been defeated. They didn't really have a way to oppose it, so they set up a military presence in Germany. The idea being to prevent Germany from really getting to a point where they can threaten the security of Europe the way that Germany had done under the Nazis. But when that happened, they realized that if we have a military presence in a particular place, it is very easy for us to come to influence the politics and the economy of that environment.
Exactly.
I know your question was not generally to we are focused here on Africa, but it's also
Yeah.
good to point out these scenarios to bring the response home.
Yeah.
So when they did that to Germany, then very recently, Germany had become a technological power in technology and manufacturing in Europe. And part of why they could equally do that is because they were getting cheap oil from Russia. And as we talked about earlier, oil can easily provide the ingredient to power a manufacturing base of a country to allow that country to economically grow. So you had this symbiotic relationship in which Germany would buy cheap oil from Russia. Russia would use the funds to grow its economy, and then Germany will then be able to have the to make the benefits of cheap manufacturing for its products because it was getting cheap power from Russia. So the U.S. basically, well, it's been questioned, but we all know who has the capacity, military capacity, to be able to go that deep into the oceans and blow up a pipe. So they blow up the Nord Stream 1 and actually Nord Stream 2, which was providing the flow of oil into Germany. And Germany could not really do anything about it. So by citing Germany, which we would think that they are a strong military power and they cannot really do anything about it. Now let's bring that home to
Yeah.
countries like in the south and in Africa in particular, where you have situations where they come because they've basically put in all these stooges. Um, First, by partitioning Africa into very small countries, it was very difficult for these small countries, small militaries, and who are even unarmed in most of the
Yeah.
cases, to be able to stand the pressure that usually comes from the hegemon and all of these other colonial powers. So they go into signing to these all these agreements which they have, and some of these military bases are pre-colonial. When they realized that these countries were starting to ask for their independence, they basically gave them political independence on one hand and took away all of the economic independence on the other hand, and then maintained their military presence there to enforce whatever their rule was. So basically, they say, okay, you've been asking for, we're going to make you the president of this country. You become part of the elite group, and we would, if you want to bank with us, we would even keep some of your stolen money and some of the money that we give you to be able to implement what our agenda in your country. So all
Yeah.
that these individuals have done, where these militaries are present, have been to implement the agenda of the hegemon. Now, to finalize the question that you just really asked, it is true that this military presence are influencing the policies that happen. It is basically a pressure tactic, a pressure group in these countries, posing as a facade of providing securities where these countries cannot really act as an independent country.
Wow. That is incredible. And I think that until we begin to take control over all of these aspects of our economy, from the military, finance, policies, and just the social aspects of our life, we will continue to have the West come in and impose their rules and their own values in our own economies if we do not have to stand up, if we don't stand up against them. So I know you've also brought in the aspect of Russia and China coming into the in the picture and providing maybe a semi solution to what we've been having from the problems we've been facing from the West. So this person is asking that with the growing influence of China and Russia in Africa, do you believe African leaders are simply swapping one form of foreign domination for another? Can China's development aid really be seen as an alternative to Western neo-colonialism? Or is it just a different approach to the same underlying issue of external control?
That is true. Good question, listener. I would say we should be careful when we read or we listen to Western media, because a lot of it too is all propaganda arms of the hegemon, the propaganda arms of the colonialists. By we as African countries, we have very little choices as to what we can do. When I say little choices, we need the support of. Okay, let me put it this way:
Right.
when the war between Ukraine and Russia broke up, Russia had over 300 billion in European banks in its foreign reserves. Foreign reserves help a country to transact its exchange of
Right.
goods, especially. So that if you're a country and you move goods from, like, the oil we're talking about, from Russia to Germany, that the foreign reserves that are in other banks are what enables the transaction to happen, for the payment of those goods and services across boundaries. So those foreign reserves were basically taken over by the European banks, basically taken from Russia. So Russia has realized that um, they can't really trust the West to do anything, because at any time when they're not happy with you, they will go to the extent of doing anything in order to put pressure on you to obey the agenda or to do what they want you to do. So we, to answer your question, to answer the question of the individual, we
Yeah.
in Africa do not really have much of a choice. We should not be worried or concerned for what China and Russia are trying to do, because if you look at over China is about maybe more than 15,000 years old. It's a very old country. Same as Russia. Russia is a very old country. The United States is probably just about from 1776 to today, maybe close to 300 years, somewhere around there.
Right.
Um, so in their history, they do not have that history of colonialism, of going over to take over other people's countries or to tell people what. That's why if you look at Africa, you will see a lot of the influence of the West in terms of how they come in, they take over your culture, they take over, they are even present. The population of Congo, uh, I would like our audience to correct me on this, but it's just about maybe 3 4 million, and 2 million of that is all French citizens or Europeans. So more
Right.
than close to like 25 to 50% of Congolese, when I say Congo, Brazzaville,
Yeah.
it's mostly, so they come in, they basically take over your country slowly. We do not see that kind of history with the Russians. We do not see that kind of history of colonialism with the Chinese. Chinese are very business oriented. They come in, they negotiate what they want to gain. And a lot of people have cited the example of Sri Lanka, where they built a port, a
Yeah.
shipping port in Sri Lanka. And when Sri Lanka was unable to pay, they basically took control of that port. This is, however, when they say took control of that port, is the fact that when Sri Lanka was not making principal payments on the loan, they took control in terms not owning the port, but in terms of getting whatever the benefits were to pay themselves until such time where the payment, their full principals were gained, then they hand over the port, because there is no evidence that in that history that they've exercised. Right now, China has a policy of non-intervention into the domestic policies of countries. That is to say,
Okay.
they're not going to come and tell you what you can or cannot do, what you should or should not do. Russia has historically been the country that has opposed, has provided some kind of a balance of power with the West. If you look at what the West, the reason for which the Vietnamese War was fought was to prevent the communism from spreading. If you look at so China, Russia has always been around to try to most of the. I'm touching on so many because I can speak on the details of this, but I'm trying to
Yeah.
not go into details. But Russia has been the individual country that provided the backup for most of these African countries to stand on their feet after they gained the so-called independence. You
Right.
even have Vladimir Putin himself, what was at some point in the on the ground fighting with African armies like rebels against the colonialists
Yeah.
trying to take over. So I wouldn't be very, in as much as we should always be aware in the back of our mind, given the history of colonialism in Africa, we should always have in the back of our mind that, but at the same time, we should be open as Africans and as countries of the South to working with these countries, because they are the only other alternatives that we have, without which the West has no intentions of ever providing. They keep saying aid. If for the over 70 years since independence, you should have been able to see the level of progress that Africa would have made. Maybe it would have been, look at some point, Ghana was even more advanced than South Korea, but look at where South Korea is today. So we as Africans should have been able to see some level of progress with the relationship that Africa has had with the West in the last 65 years, 70 years now, as opposed to everything that is most in most African countries right now, that is in terms of infrastructure.
Right.
The last 75 years has been built by the Chinese. And the
Okay.
military hardware has been provided mostly by the Russians. So the Chinese are providing the infrastructure. The Russians are now providing the military hardware in order to strengthen these African countries to help them stand on their own. Stand on their own. I'll make this point to end.
Yeah.
It is difficult for the Chinese who are equally facing there are military bases that are being built today by the hegemon right around that are surrounding China in order to choke China's economy. And China understands that there might come a time when they would be the beneficiary of all the sanctions that the hegemon usually puts on any country. So, in order to have alternatives, it is in their best interest to build or to interact with an economy that has a young population of an average age that we all know of, and that is 1.3, 1.4 billion strong, which would negate the just 300 million people that live in the United States, or about 700 people that are in the European, so 700 million people that are in the 750, I think, that are in the European Union.
Mm.
So it is in the best interest of China to have an alternative in that 1.4 billion strong market. So that's why they are now looking for a way in order to, even though they're going slowly, the life of a country is in hundreds of years. So we should not try to rush them. That's why they're going slowly, knowing that slowly they can help to build up the capacity of these countries to provide alternatives to what they can gain from the West, so that at some point the West will not even matter in the big picture. So I hope that
Okay.
that addresses the question.
Yeah, definitely. I think it does. And also, again, we've also seen over the years that the West, when they come in to provide any form of aid, they come in with these conditions of human right or protection and promotion, and then they bring in trying to impose their values, especially on this aspect of, I would not like us to go deep into this, because I would think that I might discuss this in another video. They bring in this aspect of LGBTQ, imposing this on countries in Africa to be able to, legalize this in their systems. And when countries that come against it, or that protest or refuse to accept this condition, this aid are withdrawn. And for some reason, some countries now will, indirectly accept them and start to push this agenda of foreign different values into their African cultures. And somebody is saying, although they bring this aspect, China is also completely not innocent, because China says, okay, we are bringing you the aid, but without conditions of human right and all of this, but we will share in the profits. Do you have any light to throw on this, just to help the audience?
I'm sorry, Comrade, can you restate the question?
Yeah, so what in effect we are saying is that the Western powers, like, they come in with a lot of these conditional aids, trying to
Okay,
influence
okay,
our African
yeah,
leaders to begin to adapt
yeah,
values that are not
yeah,
African values,
yeah,
especially promoting the aspect of human right promotion, human right protection, and then imposing things like legalizing LGBTQ into their systems, which are against most of the African
right, right.
constitutions and
Okay,
cultures.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So you said not to go in depth into it, and which is, I mean, if you look at historically, the culture of the East as opposed to the culture of the West and the culture of Africans, it has some similarity in terms of respect for certain norms in the society. And those actually create a basis for a very strong family oriented environment. The breakdown of society is equally attributable to an environment where uh, if you take, for example, the US has one of the highest number of incarcerated men in its society than the rest of per head than the rest of the rest of the world or even the rest of the developed world put together. That is to say that you get to a point where that has created the destruction of the society, or the family set, and then leading to an environment where people don't really, if you've lived in the West, people don't really generally don't care for another individual per se. So going back to, they've used that as an election tool in terms of the fact that you'd have one party supporting this aspect of human life and another party not supporting, and then you would have individuals that would vote just based on that single aspect, not minding how they eat or how they live their life, but just based on that really single item. So, but by pushing, the African culture is set up in such a way that is very consensus based, consensus in decision making. If you look at the way that the chiefs will sit down, and then the chindas and the councillors will have conversations and will come up with resolutions, and then the chief will look at those resolutions and say, then so it was a consensus based environment. If you bring in this aspect, homosexuality, and you destroy all of society, destroy culture, destroy the way that things happen, then you realize that that is one of the ways that they're using in order to basically destroy the African culture. If you China does not have a democratic society, but it's a very democratic country because they too are very consensus based. With, I would, it's difficult in just a minute to explain the way the Chinese political system works, but it's very consensus based. And once an agenda is finally made and implemented, that is what all the governors in all the various regions in various provinces are looking to implement, and that is how they make progress. The more you are able to execute on the agenda that was reached by a consensus system, the more you can make progress in the political system in China to the extent of joining their senior political bureau. So when you destroy a society by bringing those aspects in it, then it's very difficult. When I say China, China has been able to just within 30 years been able to bring up over 700 million people from poverty to the level in which China is today. So Africa can actually get to that level even within a very short time, 10 years, 15, 20 years, because it's been done and proven to be done before. And there are technologies now that can even help it get jump do that even within a much more shorter period of time. But so by implementing those aspects, bringing in those things, another aspect of this is to end in that question. Another aspect of this is just the fact that they use it as also a tool of control. They come into your society. We want you to implement this. If you do not, then we withdraw. Uganda, I think they withdraw a promised 500 million US million within 10 years that they were supposed to inject into as aid into Uganda. But the president told them that they can keep their money and keep. And to end, let me quickly comment on what one of your viewers had said, Annie
Yeah.
Bia. They said Africans do not know how to respect the law and order, hence creating a military was not in their minds. That may be one aspect of it, but the other aspect of it is that we talked about propaganda. The West has used propaganda to give the impression that they were these invisible armies, just like the La Republic government did with the bees, giving the impression that they were this invisible army, but the ADF proved them otherwise. I will
Right.
not go very detailed into that, but what I wanted to say about that what the comment that your viewer said was France, for example, only has about 200 tanks, and so it's not really a big army. It's just the propaganda that gives the impression of it. So they by themselves cannot stand a face-to-face war with a major African country per se. So they do all this propaganda to give that impression. Now, what they've done to be able to control these other countries has been the fact that they've sought to maintain the militaries of this country to the very least. There were times when these terrorist organizations will be attacking the Malian army. The Malian army talked about how they had to share one Kalashnikov among three soldiers. That is, by limiting the military hardware of these countries, then
Right.
they were bound to be able to control them. You can't control you cannot be like a French government and be able to control a very strong uh, African army. The country of let's take for example a country like Nigeria with over close to 200 million people, individuals,
Exactly.
that could potentially be. I mean, Russia only has about 140 million individuals, even though it has a larger territory.
Yeah.
But Nigeria should be able to become a power to be reckoned with that kind of population. Look at the U.S. can't just go in and attack Iran because Iran, with still that level of population, has a much more stronger army. I mean, it builds its own supplies. So by maintaining the militaries of African countries to like the bare minimum, to being more of a police force, they were able to control. So it's not only entirely about the Africans being maintaining, not being interested in law and order. It was actually deliberately designed to be that. And so
Okay.
thank you, comrade.
Thank you very much for that. And because I don't want to keep you long enough here again, I will try to wrap up and just talk about the way forward. But in general, we've seen that countries like Nigeria have received billions of more than 30 to 40 billion of foreign aid from World Bank and IMF. Despite Nigeria having all those natural resources, being like the powerhouse of Africa, Cameroon in itself has received, you and I cannot even, I don't know how much, to be honest, has received all of this foreign aid and yet is still deep into debt. And the economy remains the same from when I was 1 year old until today. And other countries have received all of this foreign aid: Ghana, Somalia, Burkina Faso, all the Sahel nations, and also the Congos. And yet, all this Southern Sudan, all these countries are still in abject poverty. So, over more than 4 or 6 decades of foreign aid in Africa, and Africa is still considered the poorest continent in the world. And most of these countries are the ones that they cite as the most poorest countries in the world. So at the end of the day, what has this aid done to Africa? How can Africa move forward without this foreign domination and foreign aid that has covered every aspect of the African society and make African leaders super dependent? What is the way forward, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. I hesitate to go into a debate with one of your listeners, but I have to say that when you have when you have a country as powerful and as influential as the United States, that even countries like Germany cannot really go against, that countries of Europe are struggling to do anything, that they are good. Countries in Europe um, have passed restrictions and sanctions against Russia that is actually damaging the countries damaging themselves, because they have to follow what the US has instructed them to do. And imagine that if countries in Europe are not able to even go against the hegemon, what about countries in, because I mentioned the fact that a lot of countries in Africa do not have a choice. What about countries that are in Africa? So their choice basically is limited to the countries that provide them the kind of base, the kind of anchor that they need in order for them to be able to stand on their own feet. So, and until they get to that position, you have two. You could say, I don't want to say two aspects or uh, the choice of two evils, but until you are able to, because it is in the interest of the other evil to raise Africa or support Africa to the extent that they can stand on their feet, because at which point they will be able to trade as equals or as partners. It's There's no evidence that one country has been wanting to colonize the other. One of the tools that these hegemon have used, going back to your question, comrade, and thanks again for having me in your studio. The
Yeah.
tools that they've been able to use, they use propaganda. That's why sometimes we fail to believe in ourselves. They use propaganda, radio. If you see radio stations like the BBC, it is actually paid for, and the programming is all designed and pushed by the British government. If you see uh, um, BBC Africa, VOA, Voice of Africa, all of that is funded
Yeah.
under the US budget. So why would the US fund a radio station for Voice of Africa? To So we need to know that some of these things that we listen to is all propaganda. Now they push in, um, they use other major outlets, Fox News,
Yeah.
MSNBC, and the rest
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
propagate their message. Another way they've done this is through stooges. They put in stooges in our various governments. I'm going to learn. I want to first of all present to us so we can see the things that they've done and see what we can do in order to be able to go against those things to bring ourselves growth and development that is needed in our community. So they've used stooges and put them at the heads of our governments so they can continue to implement what the agenda is. They have used the element of currency control in most other countries in Africa, 14 of them especially. They are the ones that are that are printing the currencies of these countries, and they have other monetary policies
Right.
that is run by them. In effect, these countries cannot run their own monetary and fiscal policies independently.
Yeah.
Like if you have a situation where there's inflation in your country and you want to reduce interest rate in that country in order to manage inflation, sorry, increase interest rate in order to manage inflation, you can't really do that because your currency is being managed or driven by some other country somewhere else. So it's very
Exactly.
difficult. So that's one of the ways that they've done that in order to control. Another way is to come in and take over our economies by having their companies be the ones that are involved in the in the extraction of our strategic resources and
Exactly.
the control of the entire major economic aspects of the economy in such a way that they can always influence it one way or the other. Um, and they can use those mechanisms as to sanction an economy if these countries do not do as they want them to do. And then we've talked about how they create this regional body or these regional bodies. They go through these regional bodies as the sponsor of ECOWAS, ECOMOC, and African Union and East Africa. So they come in and they control the agendas of this country to continue to of these regional bodies to influence the various policies in the various countries that are members of this organization and the organizations. And then they come in as military presence. They institute their military presence in order to be like the enforcing mechanisms for the agenda. And then they provide this whole aid that we've talked about in this conversation that is conditioned on on the agenda that they're trying to push. So basically, I'm listing these things out so that way we can identify the various mechanisms through which they control our systems and prevent these countries, African countries, countries of the South, from growing. So now policy has to be structured in such a way that it now identifies these things, which I'm hesitant to because of the time and going into details on in each one of them. Um, Take for example the regional bodies.
Right.
You cannot just go into ECOWAS and then influence the policy. So what do? You do what the AES did or the Sahel states of the Sahel did by completely coming out of them and creating their own organization that seeks to benefit them, that seeks to actually look after what they are seeking to accomplish for the benefit of that country, one way. If you look at what the non-governmental organizations, the Sahel region, one of the things that they've done is to basically ban all of those governmental organizations from their system, ban them from even existing there, because these organizations that are being used to influence, when they are not able to find an individual that will basically play the part that they want them to play, then they go through this non-governmental organizations to try to start influencing citizens and use their media to do the propaganda to make the citizens lose trust in what for example, the governments in the Sahel are trying to do. So ban all of them. They haven't benefited our society for all these years. Send them away home packing. So just identifying those things and then looking for ways around them slowly. Sometimes it's very difficult to, like what the Sahel regions have done by kicking away all these foreign militaries. Sometimes it's very difficult to just kick them out, but slowly removing their powers, eliminating. I mean, by coming up with policy that reduces their presence or reduces their power and influence in Europe. So by doing those, we get to a point where slowly we become, as African countries, more independent and being able to draft our own future, being able to find ways in which to implement our own agenda.
Okay. Before I come to you to give your closing remark, I just wanted to add that I was listening to PLO Lumumba, Professor Lumumba, talking on this, also on this important topic about humanitarian aid and what its influence in Africa. He was of the opinion that he runs a foundation in more than 30 African countries. So he said, and he does not receive foreign aid from USAID, from Oxfam, from World Vision, from all of these organizations that come in the guise of providing aid to Africans and control every aspect of the projects that they intend to implement in Africa. Because then he also talked about the fact that he has traveled to more than how many African countries and gone through all these projects that these people claim to come in to implement, whether it's about building primary schools or boreholes or providing sanitation or health in rural communities. But when they come and put up a structure, what they do is they bring in their own people to run those structures. And when the face of that project faces out, the project itself dies in that community because there is nobody there to control or to continue to, to maintain those projects, because they kept their own people in that, in those to run those projects to reflect what they want and not what is beneficial to the people, because they didn't ask the people's opinion on what they want as need within their communities. They impose the needs on the people, and so these were really not valued. So he's been encouraging that Africans, we have a lot of Africans who can stand and support initiatives within Africa. And he cited a lot of examples like the kings of Ghana, those of Nigeria, and some people, buoyant Africans in Tanzania, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Rwanda, that are supporting good initiatives in Africa that do not bring in their own influence or policies to impose on our African people. And so he's saying that for us to really break out of this foreign domination, Africans must learn to take decisions, not to be to be the ones writing for what is this again? Reports to donors or writing projects, because that is what they reduce the Africans to. When they come, you are the one writing the project, you're the one reporting the project, and it must be on their own terms. So he said we can all just say no to this foreign aid because we have enough in Africa to be able to stand on our feet. And we have the skills in Africa. Those that have been trained in their countries can totally provide these skills for us free of charge. And Africa can truly be up its own military that can stand and defend Africa, not a military that is imposed on us with conditions and take total dominance in Africa. So I just wanted to add that before I give you the room to because he's talking really strongly against foreign aid in Africa and what the chaos and the havoc that it has created in Africa. So he still encourages that Africans can truly stand independent if they want to. If they choose not to depend on this foreign aid, they can actually stand independent. So thank you very much. And please, your closing remark before I close up the show. You've done well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, comrade. I would say this before we close. Africa has what the world needs, and Africa needs what the world has. When it comes to what is Africa's current needs, Africa needs significant amount of infrastructure. Africa needs a significant amount of talent, talent in terms of capacity in order to continue to build its society. And Africa has a lot of resources that it can offer to the world, and that is how trade happens. And when trade happens like that, everybody benefits. So that said, aid is or shouldn't be the need of Africa. Aid shouldn't be the need of countries of the South. Aid should be used when there's a country that I think is located right next to, I forget who the president is. The president is a lady, it's an island. The island suffered from a hurricane, or as it is called in the East, from torrential rainfall, which was mostly flooding the island. And in that case, you had governments that provided significant amount of aid to help the population there. That is where aid comes in. But then, because the U.S. was seeking to build a military base, they basically came in and proposed security and for the. I mean, you have someone that is basically sinking that does not even know that they will exist in the next 10 years, and instead of providing what they really need, you're asking to provide security because you want to build a military base that will then go on to oppose or at least to meet your military strategic objectives. So, but we should be careful as Africans because as we look ahead, our population is expected to double to over 2.3 billion in the next maybe before 2050, as it is expected. And with that number of people, we Africa has to come to a place where it has to find a way to support this level of growth in human beings, because these are young people in childbearing age, and they will go on to be the future of Africa. So it's good to provide that basis for them. So the point here being that Africa needs to rely less on aid, but being able to extract its own resources, convert them to almost finished goods, and get it to its buyers to the extent that it has added value to those goods. By adding value, it's employing its people to add that value. Africa needs to be prepared to collaborate with other countries. Senegal, I think, that's Senegal. One of the African, I think Senegal is recently receiving. There is a company coming from Russia to actually establish a manufacturing plant, an auto manufacturing plant in Senegal. Those are the kinds of partnerships that Africa needs to put together. So as we move forward, as Africans, the template that the Sahel region has set for us should continue to be expanded. Hopefully, that other countries can join that Lipta Kogoma, which is the agreement between those Sahel states, and they're looking to working like a confederacy, where they are all looking after the interest of each other and building together. This will help in the long run to bring Africa as a single operating entity instead of these divided nations. Uh, we need to be able as Africans to get up in the morning, get in a train. If we have a job in Morocco, get in a train, fast train that takes you across the continent to
Exactly.
Morocco, and then in the evening if you decide not to come home that same day, maybe take a flight to Algeria, spend some time there before coming home the next day. We need to be able to build inter-country relationships without the need for visas, without the need for passports. We need to be able to look after each other, looking at ourselves as Africans, being able to establish a military that looks after the interest of all Africans, being able to compete in that kind of relationship. Now, I wouldn't end this without mentioning Ambazonia. There is
Exactly.
there is there is equally the aspect of the Amazonian state, which is the creation of the hegemon. We should know that no country is ever going to intervene for the freedom of a people based on some moral. There's no intervention that has ever happened to for because of some moral issue. It has always been a game of interest. So Amazonia cannot wait for anyone to look at the moral aspects of what it is going through to think that there will be an intervention. The fight for the freedom and the independence and self-determination of Africa should equally be the fight for an independent Ambazonia. So that fight has to be carried on equally by Ambazonians themselves, knowing that they will not or never get any help from anyone, knowing that their future or the determination, their self-determination, is inherently going to be their objective, their true fight. So as we look at this subject of aid, as we look at this subject of the control of the hegemon um, in Africa, and that continues to stifle the growth and independence of the African country, we should also look at that in the context of what fight has to be done by Amazonian people in order to become independent and and be able to draft the path for our own future. But I want to take this moment to thank you so much, comrade, for this opportunity to be on on your platform and sharing this space with you and being able to communicate this message. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. And don't sign off yet. I will be right back there with you. And I cannot appreciate you enough for taking out time for your busy schedule. So uh guys, let us thank our guests for providing such an insightful and thought-provoking insight on a topic that continues to shape the future of the continent. It continues to shape the future of every single country in Africa and also every single young African who wishes to see change in the continent. So this topic is a very deep and thought-provoking countries, not just to the youth, also to policymakers, to governments, and everything that has to do with shaping the African continent. We've heard today about the deep and often hidden impact of foreign aid on African leadership and the socio-economic development. So from the debt traps set by Western institutions to the growing influence of China through its infrastructure loans, it is very clear that what is labeled as assistance often comes with far-reaching consequences for the African sovereignty. So what are we saying? Should Africa continue to rely on foreign aid? This is a question that our leaders need to keep asking themselves. For more than 60 years, for more than 6 decades, the African continent have received billions and billions of aid from Western powers, and yet the continent continue to be tagged or referred to as the poorest continent in the world. Most of the countries that have received the highest number of aid continue to be referred to as the poorest countries in the world. So why should Africa continue to rely on foreign aid, destroy its own core value, and continue to be tagged as the poorest countries or poorest continent in the world? So as we close, it's essential to remember that Africa must chart its own path, one free from entanglement of external pressure. The challenge ahead of the African leaders and the people to focus on building a future driven by self-reliance, transparency, and regional collaboration. Just like our guest speaker said, it is important for Africa to build its own governance, its own structures that can stand on its own feet. So only through reclaiming control over our resources, policies, decision, can we break free from the cycle of what dependency and truly empower our nations. So to our viewers, thank you so much for being here. If you are a subscriber or returning subscriber to this channel, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you for returning. And if you are new, kindly hit on that subscribe button, share your thoughts and comment as much as you can. Share this video, like, and show some love to our guest. If you know our guest has done well, please just keep hitting on that like and that love button to encourage him, because we intend to bring him back to this channel to discuss in depth on other stuffs that we know that he's really versed with. So let us continue this crucial discussion. Stay informed, stay engaged, and continue to ask the tough questions to our leaders, because we, the youth, we need to stand up and take our places. So we need to really ask the tough questions. It's only by understanding these complex dynamics that we can move forward for a more independent and prosperous Africa. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for the engagement. Thank you for the comments that you've shared and sharing your own thoughts. We will be back with more engaging conversations that will help our African youth and the entire continent. So, Mr. Chairman, I cannot thank you enough. And again, like I said, please keep your doors open. Let your table be cleared sometime for me, because I will still bring you back to talk on this topic. There is so much that was supposed to be covered, but it was so broad. Maybe if we tailor it down to just one country or two countries, and then we can give a better in-depth analysis on what foreign aid has done to these countries. And I would really want to bring you back on the channel to talk more about one currency, one passport, like you started talking about the network, the transport network between African countries, that one can just move from one country to another and get back home without necessarily going through the hassles of visa and immigration challenges in one border or the other. So thank you very much for your time. And hey, what can I say? God bless you and God continue to increase you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that will be a goodbye from me to you. Okay, guys, thank you very much again for your time. And please let me once again kindly encourage you to join the membership of this channel. Just hit on that join button beside the subscribe button as you watch on YouTube. And also kindly subscribe and share your thoughts in the comment section. You know how interactive it is for us in the comment sections in all the videos that we put up. And if you have a particular topic that you would like us to talk more on, kindly do so in the comment section and we will have a good conversation. So God bless you, and kindly subscribe, 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 and subscribe again. Have a good evening.